Welcome to the SJ Child Show, where a little bit of knowledge can turn fear into understanding. Enjoy the show. Hi, welcome to the SJ Child Show. Today we are speaking with Nellie Harden, and hopefully that is as easy as pronounced as I pronounced it right there. It's so nice to have you here today. Thanks for your time, and you have a wonderful family story, and I'm excited to just, get in and get to know you better. Thanks for your time today.
Oh, thank you so much for having me. I'm really looking forward to talking.
Yeah. Tell us a little bit about yourself, an introduction, and what brought you here.
Yeah, my story is really long, so I won't tell you the whole thing. I actually just recently, a couple of days ago, sat my kids down and told them my whole story. I think it's such an important, my daughters, I have four daughters, by the way, don't want to get ahead of myself. And we've been married for 20 plus years at this point. And our daughters are 18, 16, 16, and 14. So we are very, very much in the thick of everything. Teen, adolescent, adult training, middle school, high school, all the things.
Yeah.
And, but I just recently sat down and told them my whole story. And I think it's such an important way for them to understand your perspective and the way that you're talking to them, and for them to see, oh, wait, she's not just saying things. She actually understands, where I'm coming from, because I know she's been through X, Y, Z, right? But anyway, so I, grew up, I was raised by a single mom, and then mom got remarried, and I had a brother and sister there. But when I was, released out into the world at the end of what I call the 65-70, that's how many days are in 18 years. And it's really, it's not a lot at all, 6,570. I was part of a birth, a couple of them actually, in the room with the mom within the past couple of years. And I just remember when this child was born, looking at this child, and I was like, day one. Day one. And it's such a growth and development time for these children. And it was for me, and it was for you and everyone listening as well in the 65-70. And it's really our highest impact influence zone as parents. We'll always be parents. We'll always have an impact and influence. But during that time period, during the 65-70, we're not only influencing, we're literally shaping the brain. And so it's such a beautiful time. And you can either launch after that, or you can release after that. And I was released out into the world, and I really didn't have a foundation of worth and esteem and confidence, which really led me off into the path, as many young women do, of just searching and chasing worth everywhere that you find it. And unfortunately, there's a lot of dark corridors that are open when somebody is a young adult is out there chasing their worth. And I found myself in that place as well. And then, fast forward some time, I'm married, and I have four daughters of my own. So I'm my own, broken, recovering, and healing woman. And I'm turning around and I'm like, I have four daughters to raise. And my entire background is in biology and psychology. And I actually worked in the animal side, out in the wild with marine mammalogy in the first half of my career. And then I switched over to the much more messier and complicated and, convoluted area of humanity around 2011, 2012. But I love it. And so helping families with positive disciplines and shaping, and, my daughters, I have four daughters, but like, you were alluding to before we got on the show here today, you have to raise them all differently that fits them and fits your relationship with them in order to help raise them to the best of who they can be. Right. And so that's been such a beautiful lesson that I have learned and taught and learned and taught and learned and taught over the last, decade plus in working with families and positive disciplines. So that's a little short yellow brick road into how I got to what I am doing today.
I love that. And so much to resonate with you in that way. Yeah, it's there's not enough to be said and about parenting. And I had said maybe like a few months ago, there's really no like good parenting. There's bad parenting. You shouldn't do that. But otherwise you're always just doing your best. You're at your best, your peak, and you could be doing all of the great things and you think you're doing everything right. And then boom, like things blow up and you have to, like, I love that you said the yellow brick road. You have to put it all back together, right? All the bricks come flying apart and you have to put it all back together in a whole nother way that fits this whole nother, kind of journey or whatever error that you're going to go through. And it is so hard to, as a woman, keep yourself in a place that is not only best for yourself, but then always also best for being an example of how to be a great woman someday for them. And I think that we don't give ourselves enough credit in those moments to realize how much pressure that is and how much responsibility that is. And we really have to, just be kind of intentful about how we go about. And so I want to hear more about positive discipline and positive boundary setting and things, and how maybe you realized that you needed to start there. Like, what was kind of that moment or pivotal change that happened, or did you just go in with a plan?
Definitely did not go in with a plan. I was mentioning before, we went through infertility for, a number of years before we had our first child, and then we had twins, and then our fourth one was a surprise. And so when we first had kids, when you go through infertility, you're a parent long before you're an actual, a parent with a child in your arms, because you are sacrificing so much for that child. And so by the time we had kids, and when they started coming, they just started coming, right? And then I have 4 kids, 4 and under, and I'm like, wow. And we were just so grateful to have our children at that point. So, there's that honeymoon period. But then when you're taking care of 4 that are 4 and under and growing, has this group, really, when you have them that close together, they're growing as this beautiful, sisterhood, literally, in our home. And then the perspective starts to shift when you start having those situations. Maybe something happened at school, maybe there's something happening in your extended family, and you're like, okay, hold on, this isn't just about me, playing with them all day or doing this. I'm literally teaching them life. And so I think one of the most beautiful, side effects, if you will, of my first part of my career working in the wild and working with animals is that I got to see the black and white character of parenthood, of, this childhood experience. The reality is, and yes, it's beautiful and there's lots of fun and games and our messy humanity and all of this, but the reality is our childhood is to prepare us for adulthood. Yeah. And so when those realizations start coming along and those situations start coming along, and you're like, hold on, I'm not just, holding up a ship here and playing, I'm steering a life, right? So I call parents architects, family architects, because we are planning, we are designing, and we are building the beginning of somebody else's life. Right. And that's what this foundation is that we're having there. So once those realizations start coming along, and it's like a snowball effect. Once it happens for the first one, you're like, oh, wait, no, these guys too. Oh, wait, these guys too. And so you're like, okay, what can I do to start building? And so always having the mindset, and this applies to so many areas of life, what I'm doing and what I'm teaching and, my behavior and their behavior, our interactions today are actually serving their future self. I am not serving just today. In fact, serving today is a small part of what I'm doing. I am serving their future self. And so once you have that mindset in, it's like, okay, so I'll just take a real world example, right? I have a 14-year-old. Yesterday was her birthday, actually, and she had a test today, and she's in 8th grade. She's taking 2 high school science classes concurrently right now. So she has a lot. She's trying to separate these 2 sciences and being like, what am I being tested on? And all. So it's confusing for her. It was just an ill hiccup of a setup with scheduling. It is what it is. But she's doing great, but she had a test in one of them today, which means, of course, yesterday some of it had to be spent studying. But in her 14-year-old mindset, she's like, but it's my birthday. And I'm like, but that's life. Like sometimes that happens. I can't change your test day tomorrow. I wish I could, but I can't. So we have to spend part of today making sure you're effectively studying so we can, you can get through it and have a good time later on. And she was distraught about it, which if I was just living for yesterday, if I was just living in the moment, I would have been a distraught mess too. Been like, you know what, cool it, chill out, do all this. And I would have been down the spiral with her. But I was like, okay, how can I serve her future self right now, even though she is a sloppy mess right now, but I need to be able to stay calm so that we can not only get through today, but the next test that comes along, the next birthday that has an unexpected thing that needs to happen on it, right? It's not a big deal. I've been through this before. I remember sometimes things just happen on your birthday, right? And so that's just a really simple real world example of, what I'm talking about here. And so positive parenting is really just about serving their future self, but asking yourself in the moment, how can I serve them right now? And how can we walk forward? Always looking in the future, not just at the needs and especially wants of right now.
Yeah, definitely. And our kids today, I mean, what an era that they are growing up in, bigger and different than any of us could ever imagine. Flooded with, images and sounds and all of the things 100 times, million times faster than any adult around them has taken in. And how do we then, as parents, try to be understanding and also be protective and keep that safe boundary with those types of things? What do you guys do in your family?
So in the second half of childhood, so childhood is definitely broken up into caregiver and trainer or guide, right? And so that's what we're doing in the second half of childhood. First half of childhood is very much taking care of those physiological needs, making sure they feel secure, right? But second half of childhood, we're building them into the young adult that we want to launch out into the world. And that's a partnership. First half, you're doing everything for them, right? This is what you're wearing. This is what you're eating. This is what, who your friends are. This is who you need to say hello to. These are the words you need to use. Second half of childhood, it's a partnership with them. And it's vitally important that we are building this foundation. I call it the WEC foundation. So worth, esteem, and confidence. And in the bottom ring of that, I think of a 3-tiered cake. I'm not even a dessert person, but that's what comes to mind. But anyway, the bottom, ring of that is worth, and it is incredibly, vitally important. And I think if you asked any parent out there today, they would say, yes, I definitely want my child to leave home knowing that they have worth. But it's a cloud. It's very, there's nothing to grasp in there very easily. And so what the work that we do is put actual actions and logistics and systems to ideas like worth, esteem, and confidence that are hard to grasp and don't have a lot of, to-dos out there. So with worth, there's 5 things that every human ever is and will be needs. And that is to be seen and heard and loved really belong somewhere and have a purpose. And so what you're describing in this world that is so information heavy and there's so many ideas and thoughts going through their head is especially that heard piece. They need to know that they're heard and seen, right? All five of them are equally important, but in the case that you're describing there, being heard and seen. And so as a parent, we need to become really good listeners. That means not talking over one another when you're in the car, right? If someone pokes up and then is shut down because someone else started talking, be sure you wrap around and say, "Oh, what were you about to say? I really wanted to hear what you had to say," right? And then they're like, "Oh, my ideas are worthy. Someone actually wants to hear what I think and what I have to say." Asking their opinions very often is so important. When they walk into a room, be sure you make eye contact with them and actually say their name. Our brains react when, like, certain areas of our brain actually react and light up whenever our name is being said, especially in a positive light.
Yeah.
Not the whole middle, first and middle name, you're in trouble. That's a different light up. But anyway, so, "Hey, how you doing?" Lana's one of my daughters. And, "Oh, I'm good." And then we have a conversation and distractions are put down so they know I am worth someone's focus. I'm worth someone's time right now. Listen, out there in the world, we cannot control what is going on to a great extent, but in the home, you can be a team and a team that works together. The parents are the captains, right? Absolutely. But you're a team together, and our kids are so smart, not just my kids, everyone's kids are so smart, and they have great ideas. They just need to be listened to. And when you think about the opposite of all of those things that I mentioned, right? If you want to be seen, right? The opposite is invisible. If you want to be heard, right? The opposite is that you don't have a voice. Loved, unloved, belong, you don't belong. All of those things, the opposites of those worth, are what we are seeing in the root cause of all of the issues that we're seeing with adolescents today, right? And so we need to make sure we're filling that worth bucket and teaching them how to fill it themselves through intrinsically, right? First, before extrinsically. But us as their parents, us as their family, we can start feeding that into them so that they know that they do have that worthiness. Last night, I was speaking with a group. I work in the community with a group of middle and high school young women. And they just were, I sit down, we're talking like, "What concerns do you have right now? Is there anything that's bothering you? Is there anything that you have a question about?" And all of these concerns about world politics that are happening thousands of miles away were coming up, right? And they're like, "What does this mean? What does this mean for our future?" And it's like, "Well, what do you think? What have you heard? How do you feel about this?" So instead of being the answer for everything, reflect back a question so you can dig deeper into what they're feeling and thinking. And some of those things that they might have heard or that they're thinking, you're like, "No, you don't need to worry about that," or, "That's not actually necessarily true." So you can course correct along the way, but you won't know what to do unless you are a listener first. So I think that's one of the biggest things that you can do as a parent.
No, I completely agree. And there's a difference between listening and active listening.
Yes.
Really getting in there and letting them know that you repeat back what they're saying and so you feel this, and that. Okay. I completely agree with that. I think that there's such and maybe in the sense that it sounds a little bit like you and I kind of went through life imagining that for ourselves, not understanding how to teach it. Number one, feel it for ourselves. Number two, so I think it's really powerful that we can get to the point where we can offer that as a tool for daughters, especially. I remember when my daughter was born, or when she was maybe 2 or 3, and thinking, okay, I never want her to have that, just like you're saying, that sense of worth not being there, that questioning the value, questioning and having these like self-love issues. And I just, how can I right now like change the path of not having, that happen to another person. And my own idea, which may be crazy, was that I told her, and she's my only daughter, told her, no matter who says, like grandma says, oh, do you love grandma the most or whatever, you always say, I love myself the most. You always say, I love them. I come first. I love myself the most. And I think that I see her now, and even when she's struggling during this tricky adolescent period of, sixth grade, I still see that inner love or that inner like confidence and respect for herself above all others. It's still, I think, hard even when you do have it, though. I mean, it still is hard to understand building relationships. You have to go through trial and error on that one sometimes. And that's hard to watch as a mom, isn't it? And you want to be,
So hard.
oh, maybe you shouldn't be. And you just have to literally stay out of it. And I've realized that. And maybe that came from learning so much in the first realm of parenting that I had, which was, oh my gosh, this is someone else's child. They're depending on me and expecting me to be my best. Like, all I have is what my parents gave me. That's the only tools I've come prepared with because I haven't even birthed a child yet. So I don't even know, like, I don't have that parental, and so I think it was an interesting lesson and love for another person's child is, I think, really special that you can, do that and have that dedication. But it also came with some lessons learned about maybe that's not the right kind of parenting anymore. That doesn't and I remember, because she was, like I said, she's in her 20s. And so, 20 years ago, I was just coming out of my 20s barely and still in the mindset like of how I was raised. So the communication was bad. It was not between my husband and I. It's always been fantastic. But it was close to like raising a pet, I suppose you could say, because you don't, it's just like, come over here, yelling, and a lot of things that I learned that weren't conducive to setting up that future person's self. And it's so hard because you kind of have this amazing seat that you were preparing ahead of time. And so that was really wonderful, in this case, it was like teenage parents that now somebody else was in raising this child, and it's this conglomeration of things. And, and ultimately genetics have a lot to do with it. You can't change somebody else's personalities or, things that come along with it. So, wow, what a cornucopia of knowledge that I have gained from that. And so a decade later, when I then had a child who's non-speaking, a whole nother realm of, parenting had to come about and had to like blossom and learn how to reevaluate and readjust everything I ever thought was what I needed to do. So there, like you said, learning that there's no perfect way to do it. No birthdays are off limits just because they're a birthday day.
Yeah.
Oh.
Yeah, absolutely. And, a couple of the things that you touched on is one of the things that is vitally important that we use with our kids is serving. And so there's a family that we have served for the last several years, and they have kids, and my kids have learned how to love their kids and take care of their kids. And especially with youngest children, they can sometimes be thrown into I'm the baby, therefore I'm always the baby, category. So helping them take care of someone that is younger than them really shows them that when it's time to step up, right? But serving with your kids and having those discussions, sometimes we've served in really difficult environments or situations, but then we get to have those rich conversations afterwards, those, cautionary tales sometimes, gosh, I really wish they wouldn't have made that choice, but this is what the result of that was. And, we have those discussions, or I'm so glad that we got to serve, or look at, this unfortunate story here, how can we help out? And so serving with your kids is a great tool that you can use in especially that vulnerability piece. So this foundation that I'm talking about is built with 4 tools, and that is vision, discipline, vulnerability, and resilience. Those are the 4 tools that are needed in order to build this foundation. And that second tier there reminds me of what you were talking about. And that's that esteem piece. So self-esteem is value and appreciation for yourself, which really is synonymous with trusting yourself. And in a world where they are so distracted, they can be distracted if allowed 24/7 by literally 1, 2, 3 million people trying to speak, their version of truth, I say in air quotes, into them, right? But they need to learn how to trust themselves. And during adolescence, their frontal lobe is still very, very, very much under construction. And so their critical thinking is not all online. And if you have lived with an adolescent, a preteen or teenager, you know exactly what I'm talking about. And you sometimes do not understand, like, why are they doing that? I don't understand why. And there's a good reason for that. Their brain is literally developmentally completely different than yours at that point. If you look at the brain of an adolescent and the brain of an adult, they can almost, like, physiologically, they can look like 2 different species almost, even though on the outside, they just look like a shorter version of, you, or maybe not a shorter version. I'm short. So a lot of these like 12-year-olds can be taller than I am. And so, but helping them come up with a actual thinking system where it's a cycle of checks and balances to make sure that the end result, that behavior that they're having, which any behavior that you see in any of your kids, that is the very end result of a long cycle that goes from thought to feeling to decision to action and then result. And so they just don't have a behavior, right? It comes from somewhere, and tracing that back to what that thought was, why they chose to camp out on that, what feelings they had about that, what decisions came from that, etc. So is it hard work to effectively and intentionally, raise and train up in order to launch a child? 1,000% yes. It is not easy, and it is a lot of work, but so worth it to be able to see them go off into the world, ready for the world, equipped with their greatness.
Oh, I love that. And yeah, I always say, and I do a lot of autism advocacy work and stuff, and I always want parents to understand exactly what you just said. And I might say it a little differently, but ultimately it means the same thing. And that is, all behavior is communication.
Yeah.
And everything that you're seeing, that you're not understanding, you need to look and listen closer. And you need to, like you said, trace it back. You need to figure out, well, if they're, we never did really figure it out. So I guess that's a really bad example. There was a time where our son, we couldn't turn right out of the driveway. We had to go straight. We couldn't go down a certain street. We had to go away. And if we went down, he would just freak out and self-harm and all of these things. And you never just want to traumatize your kid for the, who cares if we go straight, isn't it? We're getting out of the neighborhood no matter what. But there's so many different times where you make accommodations to help make it easier for, especially in our case, in that matter, but understanding, I think it was a couple years after that that I had read this book called Uniquely Human. And that was kind of the basis of that, was that all behavior was communication. And so to trace back those ideas and those steps to see what is causing that trauma at the time, or that, the behaviors to occur. So it's so important that that happens.
Absolutely. And something like that, it just reminds me of when we had a situation with our kids that then my youngest also had. So the twins did this, and then my youngest, when they were around maybe 2.5, maybe 3, they were in big girl beds, quote unquote. And it was during nap time, and we read a lot to our kids. And so we have an extensive library that they had in their room so they could look through them. Well, they went through this phase where they were tearing the books. And so they were ripping the pages. I came in, I was so sad, like some of our favorite books, and books today are not cheap, right? You go to buy a picture book, it's like $22 or whatever. And they had destroyed several of them. And then I cleaned them all up. We discussed that, we respect our things. We don't do it. Sure enough, the next day, again, they had that, I like this. I'm going to do this. Right. And so I was like, okay, well, this obviously isn't working. And so I was trying to think of what they were getting out of this. And so they just seemed to really, like the ripping, it was entertaining to them. And so I just went to the store and I bought a ream of computer paper, and I put that in the room. And I was like, this, and I ripped it, right? This you can do. Those, no. And sure enough, I came in, and that almost the whole ream was like in confetti around the room, but the books were okay.
Yeah.
And so just helping, like understanding they aren't doing this to be disrespectful, right? They aren't doing it to be obstinate. They aren't, doing it because it's a book and, mom and dad paid money for this. And so I want to destroy it. Like it wasn't all of these, stories that we can tell ourselves that is happening. It's like, it's probably a lot more simple than that. Just look at it and see, what are they getting out of this, or what do they not want to get out of this? And that's just a story that comes to mind. And they just really liked ripping paper, something about the noise, the feel, etc. And so when then my youngest started doing it 2 years later, I was like, I know this face. My oldest never did.
Here you go.
Yep. Yeah. My oldest never did, but those 3 did. And so anyway, just looking at tracing it back. What are they getting or not getting or afraid of, or try to answer that question. Yeah.
Definitely. You said something kind of in the very beginning, and it reminded me of something my husband just told me the other day. And that was about what you're bringing to relationships and how you're showing up for relationships, or chasing things, you had said, I think, in a sense. And this might be completely off topic of what we were just talking about, but my brain wants to talk about it anyways. That is, I heard something my husband said, don't ever go to the grocery store hungry, because what do? You get there and you make bad choices. You are just like in impulse, and you're craving, and it's all there. And so it all looks good, and you buy way too much, or you buy all the things you didn't mean to buy. So don't go into relationships thirsty either. Looking, seeking, trying to fill whatever space the last relationship filled for you. Or how do you navigate with your girls how to seek out friendships, or when friendships end, how to then maybe take some time before jumping back in?
Yeah, absolutely. That is a huge topic, especially for adolescent young women, is the fickle world of friendships, And so to your point, some people might have heard of HALT, right? Before, like, don't make a decision when you're hungry, angry, lonely, or tired, because then you're not going to make a decision that actually serves you. And the cycle that I discuss and teach for that middle tier of esteem, is I call it the HALT cycle for her aligned and living thoughts, and really going through and doing that. But I bring that up because it's about trust in yourself again, and helping or learning how to be whole on your own without filling the gaps with somebody else, because people will fail you every time. And that's not to say the world is a terrible place or what have you. I mean, I've been married to, my husband for 22 years, now, and every single moment of every single day for 22 years, it's not always rainbows. You have to be able to work with people, and they will let you down sometimes, but that doesn't mean you give up on them. At the same time, you need to have a healthy boundary up, especially with these, middle and high school relationships, to say, you know what, this really isn't serving me right now. It is not serving my future right now. I need to have a healthy boundary up. That does not mean that I have a license to be unkind. It does not mean I have a license to be rude, even if they're being rude to me, right? And so actually just speaking with this same group of young women that I was with last night, we talk a lot about how I know that Netflix and Hallmark and all these things are trying to tell you that the relationships that you make when you are 14 or 16 will last an entire lifetime, and you have to hold on to those, because if you don't have those, then you're worthless, right? And because there's so much romanticized, the girl cliques and the boyfriends and all of this stuff from that time. I said, but here's the thing, speaking as a 45-year-old woman, those relationships that you make in middle and high school, it is extremely rare that you hold on to those on the highest of pedestals that really move your life needle for decades to come. It's not going to be the case. And I know you're in it right now, and it feels like that's the case, but I promise you that it's not. So use this time to practice your relationships, because you will run into difficult people in your life. You will run into gracious and kind and, loving souls in your life. So how are you going to treat them? And you don't want to shut down and be in a bubble, during this adolescent and training zone for adulthood, because then you're going to go into adulthood and be like, I don't know how to interact with people. And, the work I do, that foundation is built with those tools. And the work I do is right at the cross section of understanding your biology, what's actually happening in my brain and my body, especially in a young adolescent woman, right? And then psychology, that personality piece that you were talking about, and faith and culture. And so it all intertwines into building this beautiful foundation that we're talking about here, but helping them be whole on their own concurrently as they're having these talks. And that takes a lot of talks on your part, relationships. It takes a lot of talks on your part. So one thing I really recommend is having one-on-one time with each one of your kids. And so my husband and I, every week, even with my oldest is in college now and we get on FaceTime, but every week we have one-on-one time on Tuesdays. And so two of them have it on Tuesday, two of them have it on Thursday, and we swap out each week, whether they see mom or dad. So there's not this lopsided relationship, because relationships with mom are going to be different than relationships with dad. And we want to develop both of those, but we want them to know you have my full attention for the next 30, 45 minutes, right? And we do family time too, absolutely. But there's things that are not going to be brought up around the dinner table, or are not going to be brought up around the kitchen island, that will be brought up when it's just face to face, just the two of you. And you can ask those questions. You can have fun. You can build something. You can go for a walk. You can have hard conversations, whatever that is, that comes up that week. But having that one-on-one time then solidifies that relationship, that worth, helping them build that trust in themselves and that confidence, so that they can go off into the world tomorrow. And if, I don't know, let's say Sarah, or not Sarah, but
that's okay.
but that was just the first name that came to mind. But anyway, if Molly, let's say, or whatever, is not kind to you in the hallway tomorrow, that doesn't sink your entire ship. Right. And say, oh, I'm not worthy. No one in this world gets me. No one understands me because this person, said a rude comment to me in the hallway. So really just solidifying them first.
So important that they have a sense of belonging, like you said, and value and all of those. That's amazing. The wonderful kind of setup that you have for that. Where can people go to find out more about how they might be able to get coaching from you or website, social medias, all of the good places.
All of the things. You can go straight to my website. I like to keep it super simple. So it's just nellieharden.com. You'll be able to find the social sites on there in the community section, resources, master classes. I'm in the midst of revamping one of the master classes. So you'll be able to see the new one that is out there called Daughter Decoder. And so, yeah, all of that is in one place on the website.
I love that. Well, and I'm so glad that we got to meet because having a daughter, I need all of the support, help, advice, tips, and all of the things I can get ever. And so I have some great resources I want to send your way too that I think that you guys will just enjoy.
Oh,
So,
wonderful.
yeah, thank you so much for your time today. I look forward to staying in touch and checking back in, seeing how things are going. So I hope we can do that.
Absolutely. Thank you so much for having me.
Yeah, absolutely. Thanks so much.